Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Monday Q&As. So let's knock this out. First question. I prefer conventional deadlift, but I can lift more weight with sumo. If I didn't compete in powerlifting, that's the key phrase, I would do conventional only. Should I do conventional deadlift off season, or should I do always sumo? I do agree with your statement there. If you didn't compete in powerlifting, I would recommend you don't pull sumo at all. I don't really see a real benefit. The majority of the time, I could probably come up with some weird exceptions to the rule like there are to any other rule. They're going to be the exception. They're going to be rare. To where I would recommend sumo for anyone who doesn't compete in powerlifting with some intention to pull sumo at some point at a meet. So I'm assuming then that you then compete. Should you do it off season? You know, in all honesty, if you pull sumo, I would recommend that you pull both sumo and conventional. However, I would make sure that you pull sumo at least once a week. But there's certainly nothing wrong with pulling both, because what you do find occasionally happens, someone on either their squat, if they're a wide stance squatter, or particularly a sumo deadlifter on their opening pull or their second attempt, sometimes they will pull something and miss the lift because they pull a thigh abductor or something like that, and they can't pull again sumo, or even worse, they do it on their wide stance squat and they can't pull sumo at all for their opener. If they've trained conventional and they can get their conventional, even if they're really built to sumo and their sumo is massively better, if they can keep their conventional within 10% of their sumo by training both, if they strain something on a squat, because again, most sumo pullers tend to squat wide stance. Again, there are exceptions, but most do at meets because of the way they're built. So if that's the case, you'll be able to come in and pull conventional and still not get thrown out of the meet for not being able to deadlift at all. So it's a good skill to have. Plus, in my opinion, conventional is better for all-around hypertrophy. So it'll put more size on you, which is good for overall strength anyways. So it's not a bad idea for you to train both, but obviously even the off season, if you pull sumo at meets, you're going to want to keep that skill up to some extent, even during your off season. So you're still going to want to pull sumo at least half the time. All right, next question. What is your big three for athletes to perform in field sports or combat sports? Okay, number one is going to be the squat. And almost every strength and conditioning coach out there will agree with you, and we've got studies that show a correlation between the ability that you can squat for a 1 rep max and your vertical leap. There are direct performance benefits there. Again, a heavier squat gives you a better 40-yard time. Squat is high on that list. Now, number two, I would say deadlift for overall strength, conventional deadlift, but in all honesty, I could just as easily change that over for a power clean. I know quite a few very serious strength and conditioning coaches who feel the power clean is a universal test of strength and athleticism for a lift for their field athletes. And it actually carries over quite a bit to combat sports because power cleans build explosiveness. Explosiveness is very useful for any sort of combat sport or any contact sport in general. So I would go with squat and then deadlift or power clean, because then you're going to want some sort of press, and in my opinion at least, for both combat sports to where you need to punch, as well as field sports like football where you need to push somebody, or rugby, the push press. So that would be my top three. And I almost hate to say it, but I could almost just say the power clean over the deadlift, unless you don't need the push press for one of those, in which case throw the deadlift in anyways. So it would end up being either squat, power clean, and push press, or squat, deadlift, and power clean, depending on the specifics of which sport you're in, if I had to make a big three for field or combat sport athletes. All right, next question. Is it possible to do the UD 2.0 with your program for recomp? Yes, it is. And I know it doesn't meet the exact glycogen replenishment and everything that you're trying to do with UD 2.0, but actually that final workout tends to be a full body anyways. My novice program is a heavy full body program. It should still give you that extra glycogen depletion that you want before the refeeds on UD 2.0. And I think as long as you're running the cutting version of the program, I think it is still a good program for you to do on a recomp while using the dietary approach of the UD 2.0. So I think it's a very viable combination, all things considered. I don't think it will mess with the UD 2.0 program. And I think that the diet protocol on the UD 2.0 with a full body program like this for a novice who is already very capable of recomping effectively, I think that's actually a good combination. For someone who wants to recomp on my program, I think it's a good combination to run the cutting version of the program with a nutritional approach to UD 2.0. I think that will do very, very well for most first-year lifters who want to gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. Now, second and third-year lifters, forget that shit. All right, next question. How do you explain the fact that you have 50,000 subscribers, but your videos have about 7,000 to 14,000 views? That's actually pretty normal when you go check other channels. If you go look, most channels don't usually get many videos that get more than 20% of their total subscribers and views. They'll occasionally get one that does. Juggernaut Fitness gets one to do. It does have videos that have 40 or 50,000 views. They're the exception to the rule, not the norm. That's just normal. Most people subscribe to channels and don't always go back and watch every video. You factor in my video turnover rate and it makes a lot more sense too, considering that I make a minimum of 8 videos a week, usually closer to anywhere between 8 and 10 videos a week is what I produce for this channel. Not every subscriber watches all those videos. A lot of the subscribers on average probably only watch 1 or 2 of the videos a week. Only that die-hard top 10% watches every video. So it's actually pretty normal if you go compare to other channels. It's actually perfectly normal. The only thing I will point out is that due to my video turnover rate, you'll notice that the weekly and monthly views per subscriber is much higher than most channels. As in, I know channels that have 100,000 subscribers whose monthly views are no higher than what Juggernaut Fitness TV gets. So that's just the way it works on YouTube. That's something to keep in mind for all of you who are thinking of starting your own channels. Keep in mind when you're looking at your subscriber count, don't expect your daily video views to exceed about 20% of your subscribers. So it gives you a good benchmark to work with. All right, next question. What's your take on higher altitude training programs, wearing a mask and doing cardio? I know there's a risk for hypercapnia, which means too much CO2 in the blood. Honestly, I wouldn't worry about the hypercapnia so much as the fact it's not going to do anything for you. And a lot of this goes back to I've discussed this before. I did a whole video on this a while back, which you guys should be able to find. I think it's nonsense, and let's dispel the whole myth of high altitude training. If you really talk to most non-gurus, people who actually have a background in sports physiology and work with athletes, they will tell you this is a long-term myth, that the benefits that people got from high altitude training, turns out that the benefits that they got were from living at high altitude and sleeping at high altitude, not the actual training. You actually train slightly better and induce better results by training with more oxygen, not less. So an ideal scenario would not be to restrict with mask. It would be to sleep and live at a high elevation and come down to sea level just for your training, or wear an oxygen mask with more oxygen for your actual training. That will actually help improve your stamina and endurance more, because you'll be getting it through both pathways. You get superior training by training with the more oxygen. So the masks are actually a negative. It's a really dumb idea. It's just marketing hype based upon some mythology that hasn't died yet, that is still used by a couple of pro teams out there. So remember, the benefits of the high altitude training, which is what they're trying to replicate, are not from training at high altitude. It's from living up there for a month or two. It's the fact that you're sleeping there and living there and spending your day there. That's what gives you that extra red blood cell count. It's not the restriction during training. All right, next question. Can someone with a good amount of muscle mass, natty, have low testosterone levels? Yes, it is absolutely possible. Does that make it slightly less likely? Yes, it does, because testosterone levels are one factor. But when you're near the normal physiological range and you're having the normal correct daily undulations in your testosterone levels, believe it or not, its impact on your overall muscle growth and gains is relatively small. Meaning someone with low testosterone, like clinically low, like they're down at 300 or less nanograms per deciliter, could probably make 70 to 80%, if not 90% of the gains that they could make if they were if they were at double that level. It's not a big difference. It's just a small amount. Is it enough of a difference to measure? Sure, it's a little less, but it's not enough that they're not going to make good gains still if their training, their rest, and their nutrition is still in order. It's just not really ideal. And of course, if they're only making, say, 80% of the progress they could make, and they trained for 10 years straight with the low testosterone levels, they would still make the sort of progress that they would have made at 8 years with more ideal levels that are in the perfect range. So they would still have 8 years worth of solid progress. Well, most guys can get, at least for a natty, can get relatively big by true natty standards in 8 years of hard training if you actually train pretty hard. In fact, a lot of guys are going to reach pretty well their limit by then to where they're not going to make noticeable changes anymore after that. So yeah, they absolutely can. It's just that it'll take a little longer. It'll be a little harder. They'll recover a little slower, but it's not going to be dramatic. Like having low testosterone levels doesn't cut your gains to a third or cut your gains all completely. That's a myth. And in fact, you'd be surprised. Look how many women can actually make some gains when they are genetically completely not predisposed to make muscle gains. They have lower muscle fiber density, lighter bone structures, and they have testosterone levels that are dramatically lower than someone who's suffering from clinically low levels. In fact, most men, if they were castrated, will still produce more testosterone than most women by a small amount. So put that in perspective, yet women can still make some gains. Even with all those disadvantages, they still make gains if they train. They make very measurable, decent gains. It's just not enough that it would stop you. So no, it's silly, but it is a factor, but it's not the only factor and not even the primary factor. All right, next question. Can masturbation help you get to sleep? I'm going to treat this as a serious question because I can actually see the viable application of this. Yes, it can under certain circumstances. And one of the things that's been noted in psychology, and anyone who's taken a freshman level like psychology of sexuality course or anything like that at a university has already found this out, that it has been studied and shown over the years that men tend to fall asleep after they have sex. And that is because, at least in Western countries where it's been studied, a large percentage of men, while they're growing up and during their teens, they masturbate at night before they go to sleep. They train their mind to then associate having an orgasm with feeling sleepy and going to sleep afterwards. So for them, it's just part of their sleep ritual. So a lot of men, accordingly, after they have sex, get sleepy because they train themselves for years to fall asleep after the orgasm. So they have an orgasm in sex, they tend to get sleepy sometimes and fall asleep. So that actually explains why. So then by that same token, if you've also trained that association from your teens, and odds are you're probably out of your teens if you're watching my channel and listening to all my advice, you might still have that association and yourself already trained to do that as part of your sleeping ritual, in which case, yes, it will very possibly help you fall asleep, but it's because you've trained yourself to do so. And that's a very powerful thing when you train habit. All right, next question. Thoughts on the new Star Wars teaser? Oh, you guys know I'm going to answer this because I'm a sci-fi and fantasy nerd. I am hopefully optimistic. Some of it looks a little cheesy, but it looks good. That's the thing. So far, what I see so far in the 2 teasers I've seen, they look good. And I'm really hoping that it lives up to the standard, but part of me is scared because Disney owns the franchise now. They bought the entire Star Wars franchise for billions of dollars, but they own all of it now. And I'm scared they're going to mess it up. But I will say this. Walt Disney, I'm going to swear an oath to you before gods and men that if your company fucks this up, I'm going to come find your grave and I'm going to desecrate it, and you will get no peace in death. So you better hope they don't fuck this up. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.